Now, to fix the way those values are displayed, we can use a pipe, which is a feature provided by Angular about which you learned, which helps you format values. And you apply a pipe to a value that's output in the template by adding the pipe symbol here, this vertical bar, and then thereafter the pipe name. And in this case, I'm using the built-in currency pipe that's provided by Angular. Now, in order to unlock this pipe in this component here, I need to go to the component TypeScript file. And then there we need to add the pipe to this imports array, the currency pipe. And we also need to import it from Angular Common. With it imported, it's available in the template, and we can add it to all these values, except for the year, which of course is no currency. If you then save that, and you again enter something here, you should see values that are formatted in a nicer way. By the way, you could also configure this currency pipe by adding a colon after it to pass parameters into it. For example, if you wanted to output the value as euros instead of dollars, you could do it like this. Of course, you can learn about all the configuration options in the official documentation. Here, I'm actually happy with the defaults, so I'll just add it like this. So at this point, we're actually done with this exercise. We built everything we need. But of course, I'll now also show you some variations. We'll use a service, we'll use signals. But this would all be a valid solution here. That's really important to understand. But let's now take a look at some variations, some other ways of solving this and building this. And I want to start by using some signals. Most importantly in the app component, because this is a component where I have a property that changes when the user enters some data in the end. So after onCalculate investment results executed, this results data property is changed. And this method here will be triggered when the user clicks the calculate button. So put in other words, this here, results data, is some stateful data, some data which when changed will have an impact on the UI. And that's some data we could manage with a signal instead of using it like this. How would we do that? Well, as a first step, I'll get rid of that type annotation and that question mark, and I'll instead initialize results data as a signal by assigning a signal value by executing the signal function. And the signal function is imported from Angular Core. Now, this signal then also needs an initial value, and that initial value could be undefined. That would be fine. But eventually, I want to store a different value in there. So I'll add angle brackets to add this type annotation, to tell signal which kind of value it will eventually store. And I'll then grab this results type definition again, this array full of object types that have this shape, and add that here between the angle brackets. Now, undefined is now actually not a valid value if we tell Angular that this is the expected type. And therefore, we need to clarify this type definition here by adding the pipe symbol and then adding undefined thereafter. This is TypeScript way of defining two possible types for a given value. So with that, we're telling Angular that this signal will hold either an array full of objects that have this shape or an undefined value. So that would be one way of working with signals here and of setting this up. Now we also need to change the code where we update the results data though, because this line of code won't work anymore. Instead, since results data now is a signal, we need to call the set method and set it to this annual data as a new value. But that's then it. That's how we migrate this code here to use signals. It's not all we have to do though. We also need to work on the app component template, because there I'm passing my results data to the results property of the app investment results component. And results, of course, doesn't want a signal. It wants the data inside the signal. So we need to read the signal data and let Angular set up a subscription behind the scenes by adding brackets here. That's all though. With that, if you save this and you enter some valid data, this should work as before, but now using a signal. It's not the only place where we can use a signal though. Instead, the user input component actually also has some properties that change as the user enters some new values with help of two-way binding. And we can also use signals here. So we can turn all these properties into signals by calling that signal function after importing it from Angular, of course. And we can then pass our initial values into signal. And here we don't even need to set a type with the angle brackets then, because TypeScript will infer the type of the signal from that initial value, and we only had to override or extend that inferred type in the app component, because there TypeScript would have inferred undefined as a signal value, and that of course wasn't all we wanted to accept there. Instead, there we also wanted to accept an array of such objects. That's why we needed to be more specific and explicitly assign a type here. In the user input component, I'm fine with TypeScript inferring that this signal will hold a string. It can infer that from the initial value, and that's fine, because that is indeed all this signal will ever hold. So we can do that here for all these properties. Like this. Now, with that done, in the user input template, we actually don't need to call these signals, and you shouldn't call them, because ngModel actually already is built such that internally it does accept signals as inputs as well, and it will automatically read them and set up a subscription then. So we don't need and we shouldn't change anything in the user input component HTML file. Instead, this is all we need to do to migrate this code to signals. However, we should change the code here in onSubmit, because when I emit my data, I actually want to emit the data stored in the signal, not the signal itself. So we should read all these signals here by adding parentheses when that onSubmit method is triggered. So with that done, if you now save this and you again enter some data here, that should again work as before. Now with the help of signals here in the user input component as well. Well, and now we could actually also migrate this code here, as I already mentioned before, and not use the output decorator, but instead use the output function provided by Angular. However, I still want to add this type annotation here to make it clear which kind of data will be emitted. But with that change made, we can now also remove the event emitter and output decorator imports. Similarly, in the investment results component, we can also migrate this results property to use this input function here, like this. Then we'll actually also get an input signal here. So this will also be a signal, which doesn't really change anything in our application here, but which could theoretically allow Angular to update this component more efficiently. Now, with that change made, we should also remove this input decorator import here in this component. And in the template of this component, since results is now a signal, we have to execute it to read the signal value and again let Angular set up that subscription. we also have to do that here in our if check. So again, with that, if we save this, this should work the same as before. Yeah, looks good to me here. We could, of course, also make sure that the form is reset whenever we submit that. And we could have done that before as well, even without using signals. But now that we are using signals, we can do it here in the onSubmit method in the user input component. We can reach out to all our signals here, like the entered initial investment amount, and set it back to that initial value, which is a string with the number 0, for example. And we can, of course, now repeat that for all the other signals here as well and reset them to their initial values. Again, that is something we could have done before as well. It's not something that's unlocked by using signals. This is just the signal way of resetting those values. So with that, if I enter something here and I click calculate, you see the form is reset thereafter. So that's how we can use signals in those different components, and that is something you could consider doing therefore. Before I'll show you how you could use modules instead of standalone components, I first want to show you how you could integrate a service into this application, because that is something you might want to consider doing here.